Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone. What I want to talk about a little bit today is my own experience with creating canned RTD. And really, I'm going to talk about one major theme throughout this, and that is that when you decide to do this, this is a major commitment that you're making. It's not really something that you can just sort of decide to do on the side at a small scale and play around with a little bit. Everything about this is really like creating an entirely new business. It's not like a line extension. It's not like just creating a new category or type of what you've been doing. You know, if you're familiar with the old advertisement from Oldsmobile, this is not your father's Oldsmobile. Well, getting into canned RTDs is not your father's distillery either. Quick shout out to Dan Farber from Oso for letting me borrow his old school distillery photo here. If you're going to make canned RTDs, this is probably not going to work for you. Three things that you really need to make to think about making a major investment in. It's going to be equipment, knowledge, and time. Things that are very different from what you're accustomed to doing. My comments today are really assuming, for the most part, that you already have a traditional distillery and that this is something you're looking to add to what you're doing. But a lot of what I'm saying will apply to you if you're starting from scratch. The only place where it might not apply, at least until the last few slides, are if you're planning to outsource and have everything developed, produced, packaged, and sold through a co-packer. If that's the case, you can check your email until the end. The most important thing to think about is what equipment are you going to need to do this? If you have a distillery, you've got plenty of stills and tanks, but do you have the other things that you might need? Now, you may not need all of these. It really depends on what you're making and how you're making it. Bright tanks, brew kettles. Do you need a commercial juicer? Let me tell you, they're very expensive. And if you're thinking that you're going to peel and juice cucumbers by hand 400 pounds at a time, that will get very old very quick. And you might want to consider some other options. Pasteurization, that's something that you probably want to strongly consider. And then last but not least is a canning line. Regardless of what you're going to do, even a small canning line is going to set you back probably $50,000 to $60,000. Another option is mobile canning, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But in order to do this, you've got to make the commitment to having the proper equipment to do it right. The next thing you want to think about is knowledge and experience. You might be an experienced distiller and you've made plenty of vodka, gin, and whiskey. You may even be an experienced bartender, but going from spirits to canned cocktails is like going from bartending to becoming a food scientist. There are a lot of things that you've probably not done before, unless maybe you already have a brewery as well, that you might have to think about and learn about. For example, scaling up your products. It's easy enough to make a batch cocktail, put it in a keg on a draft system, and serve it out of your tasting room. But once you've decided to put that in a can and sell it, scaling changes. Are you experienced, and do you have what you need to do that properly? Have you thought about shelf life and stability? These are things that are very different from putting bourbon in a bottle. You probably will need to enlist a lab to do some testing for you. Can you do proof obscuration at your place, or are you going to have to send it out? Are you going to put a nutrition label on your can? Well, if it's spirit-based, you don't have to, but because it's kind of the standard, you're probably going to want to do that. That's more lab analysis, more cost, more learning. And in addition to that, you've got to think about your serving size. What's your ABV going to be and why? Do you know that as your ABV changes, your serving size changes? How are you going to develop this into your final product? Are you familiar with carbonization? It's different doing it in the tap room versus doing it on a larger scale. Diastaticus, this is something that if you are a brewer, you're probably quite familiar with. This was not something that we were familiar with, and when our cans started exploding, we had a really quick and hard lesson that we learned. So these are things that you need to consider in your knowledge and experience category. You may need to hire new help, or you may need to go and do some additional training. Time and space. You have a distillery, assuming that it's full of equipment already. If you're going to be bringing in new production equipment, new tanks, pasteurization, do you have a place to put it already? Do you have the ability to expand? Do you have the staff to do this? You're bringing an entirely new product line, which is produced, packaged, and sold in a different way. Do you have the staff time and the management time to do this without bringing in new people and a new payroll? Do you have a place to keep your inventory? Do you have a place to keep your raw materials? You're bringing in a lot of new things that you haven't had before. Your distillery is going to get really small really quick if you don't have room to do this. One thing I'll say that we learned the hard way is you can't just buy a couple of pallets of cans unless maybe you're using a mobile canning unit, and I'll get back to that again in a minute. But cans come 30,000 to a truckload, and that's about the minimum that you can purchase. Sales and distribution is another area that's going to be different from your typical bottled spirit products. Have you thought about the packaging? Again, you're going from bottles to cans. You're going from a spirit-based sales channel to a product that's spirit-based, but is sold much in the same way that beer is. Does your distributor understand this? Do they have experience with canned beverages? Do you have the ability to shop distributors, or are you already tied into one? Are you going to have to train them on how to sell and distribute your canned product? Have you thought about pricing? Canned RTDs have much smaller margins than what you're typically used to working with. Cans are expensive, probably half the cost or more of your entire cost. The product that you're putting in the can is probably the smallest part of that. And then the wild card, of course, is taxes, something I bet you haven't thought about. Your federal excise tax, of course, is based on proof gallons, and in a 4 to 7% ABV can, that's probably not very much. But take a look at your state excise taxes. Many, if not most states, charge excise tax based on wine gallons rather than proof gallons. And in many states, you're going to be competing with sugar or malt-based beverages that are taxed like beer. As an example, here in Texas, the tax on a gallon of beer is approximately 19 cents. The tax on a gallon of spirits is $2.40. In a can, for a can, your state excise tax in Texas would be something like 23 or 24 cents, compared to that the White Claw type product, which at 19 cents a gallon, I couldn't even imagine. That's probably not enough to even think about in your calculations. Are you going to be able to sell these cans in grocery stores, or are you in a state that limits those sales to liquor stores? All of these are calculations that go into what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. The key to this entire process is volume. And if you can't get your cans in all the places they need to go, it's going to be difficult. So in summary, if you're looking at getting into RTDs, I think, if you can, there's going to be challenges. Again, the most important things you can pay attention to are the equipment that you need and the cost of that equipment, the knowledge that you need, whether you have it or not, and whether or not you can get it. And then the time to make all this happen. Again, you probably have a core business of spirits that this is going to take time away from. Are you prepared to do that? Are you prepared to go into this with a full major commitment to doing it and doing it right? In the end, that's really what this is about. It's a new business and a major commitment, and have you thought through from the beginning, and are you prepared to do it and do it right? Should you can or should you go? That's the major question. Ready to drink cocktails are a small and growing category. They're on fire. Sales are increasing. Everyone is getting into the market. Is that right for you? It might be. It might be the thing that makes you a millionaire. Who knows? But here's the thing. Ready to drink cocktails are a small category and they're growing rapidly. Sales are increasing, the category's on fire. What that means is everybody else in the world is getting into it as well, including the big guys. And you're going to be competing against them, and they've got economies of scale that you're probably not going to be able to match. How are you going to compete with that? There are ways to do it, and I think you'll hear about that more from Malcolm in just a minute. But should you can or should you go? That's the question. Thank you.